When Spanish ships reached the Canary Islands in the early 1400s, they found something that made no sense. An entire civilization living on islands in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. But here's the thing, they had no boats, no canoes, no rafts, nothing. These people had no idea how they got there, and that wasn't even the strangest part. The Guanche, as they were called, looked nothing like the people living just 100 kilometers away on the African coast. Many had blonde or red hair, light skin, and blue eyes. They spoke a language no one understood, and seemed to have appeared out of nowhere. For centuries, people believed they were survivors of Atlantis or a lost biblical tribe, but when scientists finally tested their DNA, what they discovered changed everything. Here's what doesn't make sense. The Canary Islands sit just over 100 kilometers off the coast of Morocco. You can almost see Africa from there. But reaching those islands is nearly impossible without serious sailing skills. The Canary Current flows hard from north to south along the West African coast, and trade winds blow from the northeast. If you tried drifting from Africa on a simple raft, you wouldn't land on the Canaries. You'd get pushed straight out into the open Atlantic. And if you sailed from Europe, you'd have to fight both wind and current the entire way. So whoever first settled these islands needed real boats and knew how to navigate. Yet when archaeologists started digging through ancient Guanche villages in the 1800s, they found absolutely nothing. No harbors, no boat pieces, no anchors, not even carvings of ships. It was like the ocean had swallowed their entire maritime history. The Guanche fished along the coastline with simple nets and hooks, but they never went into deep water. Even more bizarre, islands that were visible from each other, separated by just a few dozen kilometers, developed completely different languages and customs. The people on one island had almost no contact with the next island over. They were trapped. Each island became its own isolated world, cut off not just from the mainland, but from each other. And this isolation did something incredible. It turned the Guanche into a living genetic time capsule. When scientists began analyzing DNA from Guanche mummies in the early 2000s, they realized these people weren't some mysterious race outside of human history. But what they actually were was even more shocking. The DNA revealed that the Guanche were direct descendants of ancient North African people, closely related to the Berbers. Their mitochondrial DNA showed haplogroups like U6B1 and H1CF, both characteristic of prehistoric North Africa. Their Y chromosomes carried lineages EM81 and EM78, linked to modern Berber communities. So far, that made sense. But then scientists found something else. The Guanche genome contained genetic variants tied to Ice Age Europeans, specifically genes for light skin, light hair, and light eyes. These variants were once common in populations living in European refuges like Iberia and the Balkans, when ice sheets covered the continent. But over thousands of years, these genes were diluted or disappeared from mainland North Africa through migration waves, farming expansions, and Arab invasions. On the Canaries, though, they were preserved almost perfectly. The Guanche had been completely cut off from all of that, and what this meant was something scientists hadn't expected. The Guanche weren't Europeans lost in Africa. They were descendants of a prehistoric population that once stretched from Europe all the way down to North Africa, back when the climate was still humid and the Sahara wasn't a desert yet. About 5,000 years ago, the climate changed. The Sahara dried up, cutting off communication routes. North African populations were either isolated or swept up in new migration waves from the Middle East and beyond. But the Guanche, trapped on their islands, escaped all of that. They carried an ancient genetic mixture, part North African Berber, part Ice Age European, a combination that vanished from the mainland but was perfectly preserved by the ocean. This biological isolation shows up clearly in their mummies. The Guanche created one of the best preserved collections of natural and semi-artificial mummies in the world. And what these mummies reveal is almost unbelievable. In the dry volcanic caves of Tenerife and Gran Canaria, hundreds of bodies have been found with skin, hair, and even eyebrows still intact. Unlike the Egyptians, the Guanche didn't remove internal organs or use natron salts. They dried the body using sunlight, volcanic ash, and aromatic resins, then wrapped it in goat skins and sealed it in airtight caves. Their goal wasn't to prepare for some abstract afterlife. It was to keep their ancestors present among the living. Isotope analysis of teeth and bones shows they were pastoralists and semi-nomadic farmers who lived mainly on goat milk, meat, barley, figs, and fish. Some Guanche populations even had lactose tolerance rates over 60%, higher than most modern North African groups. This reflects a long history of milk consumption and natural selection in an isolated island environment. And the mummies confirmed something else that had puzzled the Spanish for centuries. Although most Guanche had dark hair and brown eyes like other North African communities, an unusually high number had light hair and light eyes. This matched the ancient genetic variants found in their DNA. So when Spanish conquistadors wrote about blonde-haired warriors and blue-eyed women, they weren't exaggerating or imagining things. It was a rare biological reality, preserved on islands that time forgot. But their genetic legacy wasn't the only thing they left behind. On Tenerife, the stepped pyramids of Guimar were built from volcanic stone, arranged in geometric patterns, with axes aligned to the summer and winter solstices. Debates continue about their exact age and purpose, but significant evidence suggests they weren't just random piles of stones. They were ceremonial structures tied to solar cycles, and across the islands, more strange patterns appeared. Stone circles, sacred sites called canares, and spiral carvings show up across the Canary Islands, bearing striking similarities to megalithic art in the Mediterranean and North Africa. This suggests the Guanche preserved fragments of a Neolithic ceremonial and astronomical tradition that was once widespread when the Sahara was still green. Their religious beliefs reinforce this. The sun, called Aman or Majek, was the ultimate source of life. The Taida volcano was the prison of Gayota, a destructive entity trapped within the earth. Legends spoke of Gayota kidnapping the sun and plunging the world into darkness until the supreme god intervened. The Guanche held rituals at dawn, buried their dead facing east, and saw the volcano as a bridge between earth and sky. It was a belief system with deep roots in ancient solar religions across North Africa, the Mediterranean, and prehistoric Europe. But this isolated world was about to end. When the fleets of Castile and Aragon arrived in 1402, everything changed. The conquest of the Canaries took nearly a century. The Guanche fought back fiercely with wooden spears, stone knives, and intimate knowledge of the terrain, but they couldn't stand against European guns, steel, and military tactics. Yet war wasn't what destroyed them fastest. It was disease. Smallpox, measles, and typhus tore through communities that had never been exposed to old-world pathogens. Tens of thousands died within a few decades. The survivors were enslaved or forcibly converted to Catholicism. Within just 1 or 2 generations, the Guanche language disappeared completely. Solar beliefs were replaced by Christian rituals, and the ancient social structure fell apart. By the early 1600s, the Guanche seemed to have vanished from history entirely. But here's what most people don't know. Cultural disappearance doesn't mean biological extinction. Modern DNA analysis shows that about half of the ancestry of today's Canary Islanders comes directly from the Guanche. This is especially clear in mitochondrial lines, which pass from mother to child, reflecting the fact that indigenous women often survived and had children with European men. In the veins of millions of modern Canarians, the U6 and H1CF haplogroups that once belonged to mummies in volcanic caves still flow. The Guanche never completely disappeared. They exist in silence, hidden beneath the surface of modern society. Their story isn't a myth about a lost white tribe. It's proof of how history and genetics intersect. They're the remnants of an Ice Age world that once connected Europe and North Africa, separated by oceans and deserts, then buried by colonial history. Through their mummies, pyramids, and DNA, we're only now beginning to understand they were keepers of genetic memory from an entire lost era.